All right, welcome back into another episode of the Idea Collision. My name is Andrew Green, and as always, I'm your host for this. And when I came up with the idea for this, and when I came up for the name for this podcast, I was picking a name hoping I thought would be metaphorical, representative of kind of what we wanted to do here. I was not wanting to pick a literal name. I was not looking for literal confrontation or collisions. Which brings me to something that happened this week. I decided to try to post or to boost a post having to do with this on our church page, and my wife gets more of the interactions. She sees more of the interactions from the Facebook stuff that goes on, and she pointed out, she's like, you're getting a lot of negative interaction on your Facebook page. I'm like, oh, I'll take a look at that, and I entertained myself for a little while there. It's actually going to work our way into this podcast today because it illustrates what we're going to be going over. This is not just a place for me to share my personal opinions. I finally get a chance to because of the wonders of the internet. But these are topics that interact with our lives. They have a dramatic impact, I think, as we've seen kind of throughout the course of this opening of this podcast. And we've begun talking about truth. And we've covered two responses, which are to either avoid the truth when possible, or some people will manipulate it or try to rationalize it away when they can't. And so I boosted the post having to do with my podcast, and I learned a $20 lesson or so, $21 I think, just a quick boost, and I learned that. Apparently, when you put on Facebook algorithm to target people most likely interact, what Facebook interprets that as is atheists. That's what they want. You apparently want atheists because that's everybody interacting. It seemed like was someone with a snarky comment or worse than that. We'll share some of those, all right, here as we go through, because they do illustrate what we want to go through today, which is we're going to be talking about logical fallacies. These are specific types of rationalizations. In fact, this week and next week we're going to cover these kind of to wrap up this opening topic. And all logical fallacies is a phrase that means bad arguments, bad logic. So I'll give some redacted comments, but these comments some of them are just pure postmodernism. Just here's an example here. Fact, it's like I read this one. The first thing that came to my mind was the scene from Princess Bride where Inigo Montoya goes, he says, you use that word a lot, but I don't think it means what you think it means. That's very bad, Inigo Montoya. But just I don't think fact means what you think it means. And a lot of what's called logical fallacies actually don't have anything to do with logic at all, and that's more what we're going to be covering today. A lot of them are directed at the person, and as you would scroll through my Facebook, you would find that most of them were personal. They don't address the issue. They're not really logic at all. So that's where we begin with ad hominem. Ad hominem it means against the person. It doesn't want to talk about the topic. It wants to run over here and immediately attack the person. It appeals to our lowest nature. It's called low-hanging fruit, I guess sometimes. Well, a lot of this is. Once a person is attacked, then they have to defend themselves, right? So here's, for example, here's this one. Just so you know, I'm not really sure what a godtard is, but it sounds bad. So my initial what I'm supposed to want to do is either oppose that, maybe come back with my own insult. I don't know what it's supposed to make me want to do, give up, cry in a corner. I'm not sure what this is supposed to do, but anybody reading this is supposed to then conclude I'm a godtard and therefore I'm wrong. And if I were to defend myself, then they would just say, well, see, look, he's being defensive, so he's obviously wrong. So now there's that's one type, is just a direct insult. and but not everyone does that. Another style is maybe to mischaracterize a person so that they're forced to identify themselves separately. For example, we hear this one all the time. You're a fill-in-the-blank denier, a science denier, a climate denier, or whatever denier. You're whatever. Well, that sounds bad because who wants to be a denier? I mean, and so now I have to leave the discussion of what I would be defending and go to defend my identity and try to re-identify myself as not being that thing. Or within religious circles, someone will say, they'll take a look at what I view. I view God. My best understanding of God is that there's a Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Okay, and there are religious groups that say, nope, that's you're a polytheist. They'll say. Now I've got to defend that I'm not polytheistic. We can't just talk about the discussion of whether that's true or not. So it takes away from the discussion, and it's not really productive because we're running around trying to defend ourselves. Another way is to identify a person by the extreme of people who are associated with them. For example, if I said, well, you're bad. You're wrong because you're an environmentalist, and some environmentalists put nails in trees. And see, I identify and all environmentalists based on that. Then I have characterized them, and those people are going to be forced to say, "Well, I wouldn't do that." Oh, yeah, but you're associated, and that's kind of going to be when we get into. Which is guilt by association, but it begins with this defining of a person through their identity. It's more of an attack against the person. That moves us to the next one, which is called the appeal to motive. Oh, this sounds so good. We do it all the time. I've done it again. I've done some of these. They're really hard to because sometimes they really feel accurate. We say things like follow the money, right? That feels logical. And sometimes that can be a useful tool. If you identify something that looks sketchy, you might want to follow the money. But where this hangs up at is trying to identify something as right or wrong because there is a personal interest. So if I can come up with a way that you have a vested interest in something or you have some type of conflict of interest, it means that you're wrong. See that's a logical fallacy. That doesn't prove the point. You could have a vested interest in something and still be right. But if we establish that you're wrong, then that's where this is valid to start saying, what's the motive? Why did they end up so wrong? Was there something financially they were gaining or something like this? I'll give you an example here of one. And so this here is supposed to identify that since I receive a salary or other people, which I do, I get a salary, that I am therefore unqualified to speak and I'm therefore wrong. Now, this was the only one I interacted with. This is the only one. I was like, this is ridiculous, because I had just kind of walked through. I was like, I wonder what these people say. So I went to one of their Facebook pages, this guy's particular, and scrolled down until I find someone that he really likes, a guy by the name of David Fitzgerald, who's written a book that probably has sold 20 copies, but which is a logical fallacy. I just used one right there. He could be right and have only sold 20 copies of his book. But see how easy it is to do this. And so I scrolled down, and he's one of their big apostles, I guess. So he's probably sold more than 20 books. But so I messaged him, and I said, I went to that guy's page, and I scrolled down, and I said, he's selling merchandise. He's got T-shirts. Now, I don't, at the back of the church when I'm preaching, I don't have a T-shirt stand with my image and likeness and, logos all over it. I said, would it be a logical fallacy for me to invalidate everything he said based on the fact that he's selling T-shirts? No, of course not. That wouldn't be a valid criticism. He could sell T-shirts and still be accurate. So, financial interest doesn't make him wrong. Being wrong makes him wrong. And if I'm right, then I should just be able to discuss that without getting into this appeal to motive, which is misguided. A third one is called the appeal to experts, and we all do this. We all do this because, the experts, they're the experts. That's why they call them the experts. And I can always find someone somewhere who will side with me that has a PhD. Oh, they have a PhD. See, that like, wow. As someone said recently, you know what you call someone who graduates from a medical college the lowest in their class? You call them doctor. So it doesn't make a difference where they graduated. They could be qualified or unqualified. If they barely squeezed by, they get the degree the same as the valedictorian. So we all look for an expert to side with us, or a group of experts, and sometimes those will be right. Sometimes experts are sometimes wrong, and we can look at history and find that there was once a time when experts thought the Earth was flat. That did happen, and so we use this phrase "experts say" to remove this conversation from being able to be discussed. This is settled because the experts say. Your opinion isn't valid. You don't have the right to think and come to your own opinions because the experts say. And so, I should not just blindly accept what experts say. I need to evaluate their opinions. Just like, having gone to Bible college, or, that doesn't make me my opinions any more valid than anybody else's. It just makes me a person who went to Bible college. It makes me a person who's preached for 30 years or whatever. So why should this make somehow elevate my position? That's a logical fallacy. Subject a person to logical examination. The Bible says that even here are these basically new people to hearing a message that examined the things that an actual apostle was saying, and Paul didn't get upset with that because an appeal to experts it's not a valid argument. Here's one that we all use, and I hear it all the time. Oh, anecdotal evidence. Anecdotal evidence is not a valid argument. Now, when we argue a point, and there's two ways this works too. When we argue a point, we've got to have some way of examining data. Here's this. Well, this happened to my friend. That I can't verify that unless I know your friend, and your friend could be an outlier. It might be true, but I don't know that he's an outlier. I don't know that proves the thing. So now, as I say, pointing this out can be an error as well. It can also be a logical fallacy, because if it happened to you, it's like saying, well, this happened to you, so it's not valid. It's kind of like the expert thing. Well, you're not valid. Well, if it happened to me, that is a data point, at least. The question is whether this data point connects to other data points. So what you call a large group of anecdotal evidence data. It's called a study. So at the end, that's what a study is. It's just looking at anecdotal evidence. During the recent unnamed medical situation you may or may not have heard of, there was a Russian doctor in New York who had treated 700 people successfully with a particular recipe. We're not going to go into that. I'm really not interested in all of this, but it illustrates something. I got into conversations individually. I was like, this does seem to be, something that people would at least want to look at. No, as anecdotal evidence. Well, that's 700 people. That's a mountain of anecdotal evidence from where I'm sitting. And so it's just an easy way to dismiss, anecdotal evidence. And it really ends up being really against the person because, well, you have this, you're off in the corner. And so it's just another way to rationalize away inconvenient data, which is going to get into another one that we're going to talk about next week. And we'll get to there. But because that is actually more a type of logic, actually. Well, we then move to one called the bandwagon. Well, that is the appeal to the majority. We are all guilty of this because we all want to be popular. We all want to be the ones that are, on the right side of the issue. And the quickest way to declare that you're on the right side of the issue is to show that everybody else is on the side of the issue. And again, this works the same way as the experts. There was once the time where the majority agreed with the experts that the earth was flat. That's kind of the easy one to go to because it's so illustrative of this. But, that's the point. The majority sometimes is wrong. And the reality is that if I were to not be in the majority, then one of the things that I will point out is the times that the majority is always wrong, right? And the fact is, sometimes they're right, and sometimes they're wrong. And to say, well, they're always wrong, well, that's probably not true either. Neither one proves truth. So trying to avoid the bandwagon or trying to be on the bandwagon, you're going to be right some, you're going to be wrong some. Neither one of those is an evidence. That they can be indicative of something, but they're not an evidence. That really all they are is just another attempt to marginalize a person. The majority is never really a proof positive source of truth. Another way of marginalizing people is called guilt by association. This is going to be a little bit shorter today, but I didn't know where to cut this off. So we got about 3 or 4 more here. But guilt by association is it's similar in a way to the bandwagon, but it's like the opposite. Instead of you're right, or instead of you're wrong because you're not with the majority, it's connecting you to a group of people and therefore declaring you wrong. So you're not being legitimized by being, or encouraged to be legitimized by being with the experts or with the majority. We're marginalizing you because you're connected to this person, right? So I was having a conversation. I said I do these too, and I have done these. I was having a conversation with somebody on some theological topic. It was years ago, and this person quoted as we all will do. He was quoting a scholar in Greek. So I kind of was on my heels because it was, he was making a point that I disagreed with. So here's this information that seems to be disagreeing with me. And so my first reaction was to look up who this person was. I had actually never heard of the person. The names that I am familiar with in terms of Greek, professors or whatever, I had never heard of this guy. So I looked him up and I was like, okay, so he apparently knows Greek. But then I found something. I found that he had been, he's not with us anymore. He's a much older gentleman. He had been a Nazi sympathizer. Well, that's what we call low-hanging fruit. He's wrong because he's a Nazi sympathizer, and since you're quoting him, that makes you wrong. Even though his Nazi sympathy had nothing to do with his understanding of a foreign language. Those two things have nothing to do with each other. I was guilty of a logical fallacy. If you're right, you're right. Prove your point. And if you're wrong, then prove your point. Or I should say, accept that you can't prove your point and accept the other person. So, guilt by association. It's a, that would be to invalidate a position based on this. Imagine if we said, you know what, we need to get rid of our electricity in our house. Why? Well, electricity, our style of electricity was invented by a guy by the name of Nikola Tesla, who was a genius, multiple times over a genius. However, Nikola Tesla believed in eugenics. Eugenics is the idea that we should manipulate genetics or do things to eliminate certain groups of people, if you know what I'm saying. So Nikola Tesla was one of those people, right? Does that invalidate his invention of electricity? No. That would be absurd. We just recognize here's this over here in this area, and here's this. They're not connected. And to try to connect those two, and then secondarily, even worse, to try to connect somebody else to that, it doesn't prove my point. There is one called the appeal to incredulity. What is that? Incredulity. It's incredulous. That's unbelievable. And this one is a it's not really logical at all. There's nothing. It just means I simply can't believe it happened, so therefore it didn't happen. Here we go. Here's a picture. It was kind of funny, I thought, actually, but wrong. But here's what Christians believe. Well, we believe in a resurrection, which it obviously sounds a lot like Casper the Ghost. Okay. But the point of it is this appeal to incredulity. That's what this is. Underneath this is, I can't believe that would happen, so therefore it's ridiculous. Theological errors are often the result of, and so it's not just always atheists versus Christians, by the way. It is very often within a religious community. And we're going to get into a lot more of these next week, things that Christians say that are incorrect. I just had the interactions that I wanted to illustrate. But theological results or doctrines are often the results of ideas like, I just can't believe that God would. Right? We have a difficult time wrapping our mind around the things that God would do. Well, if God is a divine creature, far above our ability to comprehend, then it's quite natural to expect that he would do things that we can't understand. And so there's going to be theological errors. Guess what? Until Kitty Hawk, no one really thought people could fly. There were people that have dreamed of it, but no one really thought it was possible. Oh, guess what? It's possible. So my ability then to conceive of something does not determine its validity or accuracy. That's a logical fallacy. I can't believe that this would happen. I can't believe God would resurrect. Well, if he's God, then it's not really that hard. That's a separate discussion. We have to figure out other ways to get to that information, but simply because you can't conceive it in your mind, it's ridiculous in your sphere, that's not a valid argument. And so a famous atheist, we mentioned him I think last week, his name was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, wrote Sherlock Holmes. In one of his books, he had a phrase that I like. And it's not the misquote that everybody, elementary dear Watson. That's actually doesn't even appear in any of the Sherlock Holmes books, but Sherlock Holmes is discussing it with, I believe it is with Watson. How he's like, how do you know what is the right one? Because some of these are so difficult, and Sherlock Holmes makes this statement, and I like this statement. It says, well, I eliminate all the things that are impossible, and then whichever one is left, no matter how unlikely, that's the truth. And that's the case. Just because an idea seems inconceivable doesn't mean it's not truth. If the others are impossible, and that's unlikely, well, then that's the truth. And so we get down to the last one. And in having discussions, this is one I find in people who have some education. And it's tempting, again, even for me, because I'm 50 years old, and I've been around these conversations so much that I'm used to seeing these. I'm used to hearing these, and I hear them, in a conversation in real time. I'm like, oh, you're doing that. And so I kind of can smirk instead of, getting angry at my Facebook feed. I'm like, oh, that's a logical fallacy. You haven't really proven your point. So, and this one is one that never seems to get mentioned. And this is called the logical fallacy. Logical fallacy. What do you mean, logical fallacy? Well, when two people are arguing, there's this idea that if I can point out all your logical fallacies, that you're wrong because you've used a logical fallacy. Because you've used bad logic means your position is wrong. And it's fun for us to do. This is like a debating contest. We go back and forth, and I'm going to point out all the logical flaws you have, and you're going to point out all the ones that I have, and whoever, I guess, ends up with more logical flaws loses the argument, and so therefore they're wrong. That's a logical fallacy. That's not really... It makes me feel smart because I can point out all of somebody else's errors. And it helps me, in my mind, invalidate them. Oh, look at that. They used that bad argument. That helps me puff myself up and become arrogant. But it doesn't really show that they're wrong. A person can be correct and just use a bad argument to get to their conclusion. They can't argue well, so therefore they're wrong. A person with a bad argument can be correct. And I have to remember that. And these are things that, as I'm going to wrap it up here in a second, but I think knowing these helps us not just in knowing what people are doing, but knowing and recognizing these, I think, in yourself. It helps us have better conversations about things. It helps us not to get so emotionally involved and invested, especially with these ones. Because what's going to happen with these ones today, what these do is these drive a wedge between you and the person you're talking to, because they're all ways to marginalize them. They're not even logic. If there was just pure logic, then we don't get so emotionally attached to things or invested. But when we're insulting people or when we're, characterizing them as being connected to this person, or trying to paint them in the minority and so therefore invalid, it impacts them emotionally. And that's not a way to build a bridge or to come to some consensus on an argument. I don't really feel the desire to come to your side because you insulted me on my Facebook. What did you accomplish? If anything, you just steeled. If I was wrong, you just hardened me more in my error. So we want to build bridges. And that's what Paul wrote. He says, knowledge puffs up. It makes a person arrogant, but love is the thing that's going to edify other people. It's going to be the thing that builds other people up. We want to get people together. And we're a community, large or small, whatever community you're in, your local, whether it's workplace or school environment or whatever circles you exist in, small or large, those are places we need to build relationships, not tear people down and show how smart we are and how dumb they are or whatever. In the end, all we do is get ourselves frustrated, really, is a lot of what we end up doing. And so that's why I point this out, to be aware of the things that are used against you so that you know how to address them, but to recognize it in yourself and to go throughout your week and your interactions and to try to improve the way you converse. Some people call it fighting fair. Have better interactions, and you will notice that, if you're right, you might actually convince more people because of the approach that you take. So have a good day. Look at our our links. I have a lot of helpful links. Those are always in the descriptions. And depending on which way you're looking at this, whether, again, I always mention this, whether you are in the listening in the car, on the audio podcast, or whether you're watching this, there's other ways to get it if you're not available to do the one. And always subscribe and point it out to other people, because I think the more people have access to stuff like this, the better off we will be kind of as a society. All right. Have a good day.